Are you bored with your current methods for learning Chinese? Do you ever think about all the words you need to learn to get to Chinese fluency and get a little bit overwhelmed? Do you ever feel like the words you are learning just aren't sticking and you find that you can't use them in conversation fluently or accurately? If you have felt like this, don't worry, you're not alone and it's not your fault. I'm going to share with you today some really cool techniques that will allow you to learn upwards of 100 words a day and also hang on to them, retain them, and be able to use them in conversation fluently. So before we get into how to learn words effectively, let's think about how many words we actually do need to know. If you're thinking about spoken fluency, it's much better to know a tiny fraction of words very, very well on a deep level than it is to learn, say, many, many thousands of words on a shallow level. So for example, if you learn the most common 1,000 words in Chinese, that will give you about 80% of the entire language by frequency. That will, by the way, be about 600 characters. And if you can master those 1,000 words or maybe 1,500 words very, very well, then you could actually speak with some level of fluency. But I believe to be officially fluent in Chinese, you'd need to have active knowledge of around 4,000 words. That will get you to around B2 level, according to the CERFL. You notice that I use the word active there, so those 4,000 words or 1,000 words, however many words that you want to go for, must be in your active vocabulary. That means they're at the forefront of your mind and you can wield them whenever you need to. No matter what language you're learning, you'll always have a much larger passive vocabulary. So you'll always be able to understand a lot more than you'll be able to produce. Now, the average native speaking Chinese person perhaps might know 20,000 words, and this increases as they get older, so maybe 30 or 40,000 words. But still, the average Chinese person won't use that many words actively in conversation. So overall, I wouldn't worry too much about getting to X thousand number of words, because really it's about how well you use it than how many you know. So for example, when I was first starting out with Chinese, I used a website called Memrise.com and I built up 16 million points learning, quote unquote, 9,000 different words, and I couldn't speak Chinese at the end of it. I could look at any of those words and know what they meant, but because I was learning in a very bad way, it was pretty much useless. This isn't anything against Memrise, the website. It's just that my approach was wrong. I was using this tool in a very bad way. So speaking of bad ways to learn words, let's look at the traditional, conventional methods and how they steer us wrong in this area. So if you go to your average Chinese class or an online tutoring session, what you'll end up doing most of the time is going by a textbook. Now, textbooks aren't just all bad, of course. There are certain good things about some textbooks, and I'll get into the good parts about some textbooks very shortly, but this is how it usually goes. You have a list of words and then you have an article, and these words will often come with an example sentence, or your teacher will explain what each word means, and then you'll try and decipher the article together, and that's kind of the lesson. And then you might do exercises on it, homework, pop quizzes, that sort of thing. Then you might be asked to write your own example sentences and you'll get corrected by the teacher. Now, in my experience, there's a few things very wrong with this process. First, you just learn these lists of words without learning their characters in depth. You just sort of look at a combination of two characters and try and memorize the word as a whole. But if you think about it, there's so much about that you don't know. You don't know the individual characters' meanings, which usage of each character is in play in this particular word, the components, even the pronunciations sometimes, because often the pronunciations will kind of throw you a curveball and they'll be different in different contexts. So what you end up doing when you learn words this way is that you're learning without a foundation, and that's a really bad way to hold on to information. You should learn based on what you already know, something that's within your sphere of understanding. If you do this, you'll end up with more connections and stronger connections to the new words that you take on. Another big problem with this approach is that there's not usually a great way to review the material. Now, with apps and things like that, they usually have a built-in spaced repetition software function, which is great. But with classrooms and textbooks and the traditional format, that doesn't really exist. You kind of just write notes and then never look at them. And then you maybe write paper flashcards, which get wet when it rains, and they're not really that effective anyway when they're dry. You get the idea. So with that out of the way, let's look at what I consider to be the best process for learning words in Chinese. You first have to make sure you have a grasp of pronunciation. Then you have to make sure that you know characters, or at least you're on your way to learning them. You can't really expect to master and retain any words if you don't know what they sound like or you can't read them. You can learn words, of course, and acquire the language without reading, but it takes longer and it's far less convenient. Once we've got those first two covered, then we can actually start building our base vocabulary using a technique called living links. Now, your base vocabulary will be somewhere around 1,000, 1,500 words, and you can use this technique that I'm going to teach you even as a very high level. I still use it right now when I pick up a new word from my immersion. I'm listening or reading or watching something in Chinese and I see a new word. Oh, I want to learn that. I use the technique that I'm about to share with you right now too. It's just that this technique is especially useful when you're just starting out and you want to quickly build up that base vocabulary so you can start consuming understandable, comprehensible Chinese. So how do we create these living links so quickly that we can learn upwards of 100 words a day? Well, there's a few ways to do it. And the place I always like to start is looking at the characters. So if you see a new word pop up, you immediately look at the individual characters, what they mean, and some characters have several meanings, right? So you can use any meaning that you like and make a connection between the characters and the meaning of the word. Now, this connection does not have to be real. That's something very important that you need to understand about mnemonics. It doesn't matter if it's accurate, if it actually conforms to the etymology of the word or the characters involved. Is the connection memorable? Does it stick? Then it's a good connection. So here's an example. Let's take the word 随便. Now the meaning of this word is just casual. You can also use it in the context like 随便你, like whatever you want. Like someone asks you, hey, do you want this or this? 随便, either one, I don't care, right? So that's the meaning of this word. Now let's look at the characters individually. Now 随 means along with or follow, to look like. So for example, you might say, like I have 2 young children, and often people will say, 他随他爸, 随他爸. So he follows his father in terms of his appearance. So he looks like you basically. 便 is very commonly used as convenient. So 便利店, for example, is a convenience store. 便利, convenient. Or 方便. So 便利 or 方便 both mean convenient. So 随便 literally means to follow what is convenient. Can you see the importance of learning characters now when just looking at this new word? You can see the logic between them already at play. In fact, it's almost like the vast majority of Chinese words have a built-in mnemonic already. So for example, if you were going to learn this word, you could just say to follow what is convenient, 随便. Visualize a representation in your mind, just in your imagination, that might show that connection. So the idea of someone following the easier path, someone lazy, for example, they're swaying their bien, they're just going with their convenience. Maybe someone in their exercise clothes watching TV would be a good connection. They're doing what they want, what's convenient for them. So one thing you can see from that example is that it's very important to know what the word means, or at least you have a very good idea. You don't have to know exactly how to use it perfectly because we're trying to learn a word, right? This is the preliminary step that comes before true acquisition, actually, and we'll get to that in just a sec. But before you go and make a mnemonic, just make sure that you have a decent idea. You're pretty confident you know how the word is used, and the best way to do that is to look up the word in Pleco and get some example sentences. Just read 1 or 2. Now, many words will be completely, totally obvious, like 汽车, right? That's car. And there's not really many subtleties to that word at all. There's not any nuance whatsoever. But if you look up the word 随便, then it comes up with casual or random. What does that mean? Is it is it used in terms of the adjective, the adverb, the verb? So just look at 1 or 2 example sentences if you aren't sure. Now, this is only if you're an absolute beginner, of course. If you're a higher level, you'll be learning most of your words from immersion, reading, listening, watching, and then when a word pops up that you want to learn, you'll be able to use various tools to save that and review it later. And by the way, my recommended setup for immersion for an intermediate or above learner is to use Migaku with Anki and Netflix/YouTube. And if you want to learn all about how to use those tools, as well as a bunch of other things about how to immerse in Chinese at all levels, go ahead and check out this video for more information. Another thing you can do if you aren't 100% sure about how a word is used is you can go into Google image search and put the Chinese word in, and that will give you a much better idea of how the word is actually used by Chinese people, because Google will give you images that Chinese people have associated with that word naturally. So if you typed in breakfast in English, you get a very different result than you would typing in 早餐 in Chinese. Another great source of living links or mnemonics to learn Chinese words is the sounds. So the best way to experience this is just say the word that you want to memorize out loud and make separations or gaps or pauses in different places. So for example, let's take this new word here. 比较 means compare or comparatively. If I wanted to memorize this word based on the sound, I would just say it out loud. 比较, 比较. So Bee Gees, ow. Bee Gees, the Bee Gees, the band, the Bee Gees, right? Saying ow. So I'd imagine an image of them. So you always associate with a visualization of some kind. And then I could connect that to the actual final meaning of comparatively or compare by saying something like, the Bee Gees' voices were comparatively high when they said ow, ow, when they were singing. I know that sounds kind of weird and convoluted, but remember, these connections in your mind just take literally like a second, 2, 3 seconds, and they will create deeper connections to this word almost instantly. And if you had this word on a flashcard, or whether it's a sentence or an individual vocab flashcard, you could then put that connection in the notes field on the back of the card. Maybe you could even put an image of the Bee Gees somewhere. You can also use sound to create living links really easily if you leverage what is considered by many to be one of the most complicated parts about Chinese, which is the sheer amount of homophones. So there's a very small number of pronunciations in Chinese, but there's tons and tons of characters and different meanings that those pronunciations can have in different contexts. This is actually not that difficult once you master characters. Learning characters cleans up all that for you. And once you start building a vocabulary, that's not really a problem either. But you can leverage this unique aspect of Chinese to your advantage by thinking of other Chinese words or characters with similar or the same pronunciations and just swapping out the meaning. So for example, to learn the rather abstract and high-level word 就算, which means even if, you could take 2 completely different characters but with the same exact meaning. 就算. 就 means old for objects and 蒜 means garlic. Right now, of course, these 2 characters are not at all what is used in this original word, but I could think of old garlic. So you could say, even if you paid a vampire $1 million, he would not eat that old garlic. You could think of that kind of situation and visualize that, and maybe even put an image or put the note of that mnemonic connection in the back of your flashcard. And that will be more than enough to create a long-term memory of this word faster. Another example to illustrate this sound connection we could try is the word 但是, which means but or however in Chinese. It's technically very abstract, but you can make it concrete and you can connect with it very easily by thinking about the sound. So 但是sounds like, to me, so I might imagine Sean Connery, just visualize him butting in on someone's dance or twerking. All right, you don't have to imagine Sean Connery twerking. I'm just going with the mental connections. That's another thing about this whole process, is that if you just relax and let your brain kind of go a bit crazy, you can come up with really memorable things very quickly. And yes, I know that last association wasn't technically anything to do with the final meaning of but in the essence of the word, but it actually still works absolutely fine. But if you don't want to do that, you could just make it more like the true meaning of the word by slightly tweaking your connection. So I might imagine a dancing competition and Sean Connery's about to get up, but he holds his finger up and says, but I can't dance. Now the third and final category that we use for living links is personal memories. Now, technically, everything I've been talking about, the character connections, the sound connections, are all coming from my personal memories anyway. But what I mean here is you could actually just think of an entire connection just purely based upon what you have experienced in your life. So you just look at the meaning of the word. Let's take 说话, for example, to speak. So you might just quickly imagine a character from a TV show that you love who talks a lot, or someone from your personal life who loves to talk, or is really loud or has a funny or weird voice, and just put their name in the back of your flashcard. That's another connection. Remember, the more connections, the better. So you can draw on not just your personal life experience, but also games you've played, movies, TV shows you've watched, articles you've read, pop culture, news stories, anything that's in your life or in your memories at all you can leverage. And finally, whatever connection you make, whether it's via the character meanings, whether it is based on the sound, or whether it's a personal connection from your life experience, or whether it's a combination of all 3 in some way, it's a really good idea to try and find a visual image. Now, again, if you're a beginner, you'll be building up your base vocabulary. You can just choose an image from Google search that is related to the connection that you made personally. Now, if you're a higher level, you'll be learning most of your words straight from your immersion, but it's always possible that something comes up in conversation, you note that word down, and you want to create a flashcard or something for it to remember later. So you'll still use this technique in the exact same way quite a lot. You don't always need an image. Sometimes your personal imagination, your visualization when you made the connection is more than enough. But if you wanted to cement this word, maybe it's a particularly slippery word for you, it's an abstract word, or it has several usages, and you just want to cement it as much as possible, it's a good idea that you add an image to your flashcards. So you think of your connection first, ideally, and then you will do a Google search to try and find an image to represent that connection. The best images are ones that are, well, kind of funny. So you can actually just really easily do this. You don't have to think of a really funny situation first. You can just get your keyword phrase that's based upon your living link, put it in and just add the word funny on the end or weird or something like that, and just use that image instead. If it's more weird or funny, it's more memorable, so just go for those if you can. So that is the skinny on living links. That's how you create really effective mnemonics very quickly in like seconds. And what this will do for you is create a much stronger first impression with this word. And again, you can use this technique as an absolute beginner or a really advanced learner. I still use it right now. But this is not quite the end of the process. Making these fun mnemonics just makes the word more memorable overall, but it's not going to help you acquire the word. It's not going to help put the word in your active vocabulary. If you want to increase your active vocabulary, there's a couple of things you need to do. First, you need to see the word in context of an understandable, comprehensible sentence, preferably with audio. Having the audio is always better. Then once you've been exposed to that word in a bunch of different contexts, now you'll naturally be able to start producing it. So imagine this living links process just massively enhancing the first impression you have of a word. Have you ever met a new person and you've just sort of clicked and you had this amazing conversation the first time you met, and you remember that person even to this day? You might not remember lots of details about them or what you talked about or their name, but you remember that person for a long time, maybe even for life, right? Well, that's what living links does for words. It makes that first time you see a word much more memorable and creates lots of different deep connections to that word. So it's so much more difficult to forget. And it will stay in your long-term memory enough so that maybe when you hear it and see it in a real context, you'll be able to cement it further and acquire its grammar, how it's actually used, and then put it in your passive vocabulary. When you learn words in the traditional way, the classroom, textbook kind of way, it's like the equivalent of a cold, boring meeting of some kind where you're shaking hands, not really that interested in anyone you're meeting, and you soon forget them afterwards. Living links makes that first meeting really, really fun and really hard to forget. But it's not quite enough. You do need to still consume a lot of comprehensible input, see that word in context a lot before you're able to use it. And even then, even if it's still solidly in your passive vocabulary, to really push it into your active vocabulary, you need to be practicing speaking. As you get to a higher level, just as we learn new words in our native language, you'll naturally be able to start using them almost instantly. Now, this is not the case for every word, especially if you're a higher level and you have such a strong foundation of Chinese that when you do pick up a new word, you can create a quick living link for it. You don't even really need to review it that much, and you can sort of instantly start using it in conversation, just like you would when you learn a new word in your native language. You just pick it up, and that's because you have such a strong foundation, so many connections to be made to that new piece of information. I think that might be the minority of cases. I think with the majority of words, especially higher level words or more abstract, more nuanced words, you will not only need to see them and hear them a lot in context, you'll probably need to try and practice them in order to put them solidly into your active vocabulary so you can just use them fluently whenever you need to. So I highly recommend, as well as all the other stuff that you need to do to speak fluent Chinese, like mastering pronunciation and learning characters and consuming native Chinese content, making sentence flashcards, reviewing those flashcards, etc. As well as doing that, you also book some regular time with a language exchange partner or a paid tutor. So a paid tutor for maybe 1 or 2 hours a week should be enough for most people, just to activate that vocabulary and have meaningful conversations in Chinese. But you don't have to use native speakers. You can just do shadowing on your own. You can listen to a piece of Chinese content, whether that's an individual sentence or an entire 30-minute piece of material, and just imitate the speaker as much as you can and do that repeatedly. This is why with the Mandarin Blueprint method, we provide lots and lots of example sentences, very high quality audio, as well as long form graded content so that you can listen and shadow on the go. It's super important because it's such an effective way of activating all this wonderful vocabulary you're building up. Now, if you're watching this, you might be very excited at the idea of applying these techniques, but kind of also intimidated about actually executing on it. So you need to, learn pronunciation, you need to learn characters, you need to also find example sentences, you need to create flashcards and review them, you need to find graded and then native material. It's all a very long and laborious process. And that's why we made the Mandarin Blueprint method. The Mandarin Blueprint method is a 9,000 lesson curriculum that can take you from where you are now all the way to essentially native level understanding of Chinese. So we guide you step by step, teaching you 3,050 characters, almost 12,000 words, and we provide over 15,000 example sentences with native male and female studio quality audio. In fact, all of the content on the course, including the graded reading content later on, is all based on characters and words we know that you know. So it's always going to be comprehensible and understandable to you. You can do it on your own, of course. You can do all of this on your own, but with the course, it will just save you a bunch of time. So if you're interested in checking that out, there's a link in the description below. And if you'd like to learn how to actually use words in conversation and sound far more fluent in Mandarin Chinese quicker, go check out this awesome video I made for you with a bunch of tips inside.